Every island in One Piece is a gravestone. I need you to sit with that for a second. Every single rock that Luffy has set foot on, every kingdom he has saved, every beach where Zoro has gotten lost, is not an island in the traditional sense. It is the tip of a mountain. It is the last gasping breath of a civilization that drowned 800 years ago. And I know that sounds like the kind of unhinged cockery that gets a man institutionalized, but Anime Autopsy is here today to perform what might be the most important forensic examination this channel has ever conducted. Because fictional pirate creator man has been hiding a crime scene in plain sight for over 1,000 chapters, and the weapon was not a sword, was not a devil fruit, was not even an ancient weapon in the way we typically understand them. The weapon was water. The weapon was the ocean itself. Let me tell you what we are doing here. This is not a video about the One Piece. This is not a video about Joy Boy or the Void, Century, or whatever silhouette nonsense Oda is cooking up this week. This is a video about geology. This is a video about hydrology. This is a video about the single most overlooked detail in chapter 1089, a detail so specific and so damning that it should have had the entire fandom losing their collective mind brains. And yet somehow we all just nodded and moved on like good little consumers of fictional pirate content. I am talking about the 1 meter. You remember Lulusia, yes? The kingdom that got absolutely deleted from existence by whatever the hell that thing in the sky was. Imu sat on their fancy empty throne, looked at a photograph, crossed out Lulusia with what I can only assume was a very expensive pen, and then the entire island ceased to exist. Poof. Gone. Erased from the map like a typo in a government document. And the fandom went wild, as we should have, because holy assorted crap, the world government has a Death Star. They have an Uranus, presumably, and they are not afraid to use it. That was the headline. That was the discourse. But the real story, the actual evidence that tells us everything about what happened during the Void Century, was buried in the aftermath. Chapter 1089. The sea level rises by exactly 1 meter worldwide. 1 meter. Not a significant amount. Not the ocean got bigger. 1 meter. Oda-sensei, in his infinite and maddening specificity, gave us a precise measurement, and I need you to understand why that precision matters, because this is not flavor text. This is not Goda throwing numbers around to sound impressive. This is physics. This is displacement. And this is the confession that rewrites everything we thought we knew about the geography of this world. Here is how displacement works. And I apologize in advance to anyone who paid attention in science class, because I am about to explain this like you are 5 years old. When you push something into water, the water has to go somewhere. Drop a rock into a bathtub, the water level rises. The bigger the rock, the more the water rises. This is not complicated. This is Archimedes running naked through the streets screaming eureka levels of basic physics. And what chapter 1089 tells us, with that precise 1 meter measurement, is that the ancient weapon did not vaporize Lulusia. It did not delete it from existence in some clean, magical, science fiction way. It pushed it down. It crushed the tectonic plate. It shoved an entire island into the crust of the planet. And the displaced ocean volume had to go somewhere. So it went up. Everywhere. By exactly 1 meter. Do you understand what this means? The ancient weapon, whatever it is, does not destroy land masses. It buries them. It drowns them. And if you can drown one island in the present day and raise global sea levels by 1 meter, then imagine what happens if you do this systematically, strategically, across an entire century. Imagine you have an ancient kingdom that spans what Vegapunk confirmed was once a single unified continent. Imagine you have 20 kings who want that kingdom gone, not just defeated, but erased from the face of the earth. Erased from memory. Erased from history. You do not fight a war against a continent. You do not conquer a landmass that big with swords and cannons and even devil fruits. You sink it. You weaponize the ocean. You raise the sea level by dozens of meters, by hundreds of meters, until every city becomes an underwater ruin and every survivor is forced to flee to the mountaintops. And then you rewrite history to pretend those mountaintops were always islands. This is the Lulusia constant. This is the formula. One island pushed down equals 1 meter of global rise. Now extrapolate. Now do the emotional maths on what it would take to flood an entire world. Vegapunk told us in his broadcast that the sea level rose dramatically during the Void Century, that lands that once existed are now beneath the waves. The fandom treated this like a natural disaster, like climate change, like something that just happened as a side effect of whatever war was being fought. But the Lulusia constant tells us the truth. It was not a side effect. It was the strategy. It was the primary weapon. The Great Flood was not collateral damage. The Great Flood was the point. And this is where I need you to recalibrate your entire understanding of One Piece geography, because we have been lied to from Chapter 1. We have been looking at a map and assuming it represents a natural world, a world where islands form through volcanic activity and continental drift and all the normal geological processes that create landmasses. But nothing about the One Piece world is natural. The Grand Line is not natural. A magnetic belt that screws with compasses and creates unpredictable weather patterns in a perfect ring around the planet. That is not geology. That is engineering. The calm belt is not natural. 2 parallel strips of ocean with 0 wind and 0 current, populated exclusively by sea kings, acting as a perfect barrier to naval travel. That is not meteorology. That is a fence. And the red line, that impossible vertical wall of continent that circles the entire globe at a perpendicular angle to the Grand Line, uniform in height, uniform in structure, geologically impossible by every metric that exists. That is not a continent. That is a lifeboat. That is where the 20 kings ran when they flooded the world. That is the high ground they created, or commanded to be created, while everyone else drowned beneath them. And they have been sitting up there in Mariéjois for 800 years, wearing their little bubble helmets, calling themselves gods, while the graves of the ancient kingdom rot beneath the waves they raised. The evidence screams this. It screams it in every panel, in every location, in every architectural fossil that Oda has shown us across 1,000 chapters. Water 7 is not sinking. Wano is not naturally isolated. Impel Down was not built underwater. Long Ring. Longland is not experiencing normal tides. These are all symptoms of the same disease. These are all clues left at the crime scene. And over the next several hours, we are going to examine every single one of them with the obsessive, meticulous, frankly concerning level of detail that only a man who has dedicated far too much of his life to analysing fictional pirates can provide. The world of One Piece is a murder scene. The victim is a continent. The weapon is the ocean. And the One Piece, whatever it turns out to be, is the tool that drains the floodwaters and brings the dead world back to the surface. Welcome to the autopsy. Now, before Anime Autopsy starts cutting into the body, we need to acknowledge the other coroner in the room, the one who beat us to the autopsy table, the one who looked directly into a Denden Mushi and broadcast his findings to the entire world before the world government put a bullet in his head. I'm talking, of course, about Dr. Vegapunk, the smartest man on the planet, the guy with the giant apple head, the absolute lunatic who decided that if he was going to die, he was going to die doing the most dramatic exposition dump in the history of fictional pirate media. Chapters 1113 through 1116 changed everything. And I mean everything. Because what Vegapunk did in that broadcast was not simply reveal information. He did not give us a history lesson. He did not even give us a theory. What Vegapunk did was confess. He confessed on behalf of the entire scientific establishment that had been complicit in hiding the truth. He confessed on behalf of the world government that had been suppressing this knowledge for 8 centuries. And most importantly, he confessed the single most critical piece of information that ties this entire hydro-geological conspiracy together. The world was once one. The world was once a single, unified landmass. And then it was not. Let me be precise here, because precision matters when you are concocting cockery of this magnitude. Vegapunk confirmed that the planet we are watching Luffy bounce around on used to be a unified continent. One giant landmass surrounded by ocean. Pangaea, essentially, if Pangaea had been populated by people with stretchy limbs and the ability to turn into rubber. This is not speculation. This is not theory. This is canonical confirmation from the mouth of the smartest character in the series, delivered as his final words to the world. The continents we see now, the scattered islands, the divided seas, the grand line cutting through everything like a scar. None of it existed in its current form before the Void Century. The geography itself is a lie. The map is propaganda. And here is where the O'Hara connection becomes critical, because the scholars of O'Hara died for knowing this. They did not die for reading poneglyphs. They did not die for learning about ancient weapons or the true history or whatever. Surface-level explanation the world government gave for incinerating an entire island of academics. They died because they discovered that the world had been reshaped. They died because they found evidence of lands beneath the sea, civilizations that should not be underwater, architectural remnants that predated the current geography. Professor Clover stood in front of the 5 elders and tried to speak the name of the ancient kingdom, and they shot him before he could finish the sentence. Not because the name itself was dangerous, but because if people knew the name, they could look for the ruins. And if they looked for the ruins, they would find them underwater. And if they found them underwater, they would start asking why. Why is a kingdom beneath the ocean? Why are there structures at depths that humans could never have built in? Why does every single piece of archaeological evidence point to a world that existed above the current sea level? The O'Hara scholars found the crime scene. They identified the victims. And the world government burned them alive rather than let that information spread. Vegapunk picked up where they left off. He took their research, their banned knowledge, their martyrdom, and he synthesized it into a broadcast that could not be silenced. The sea level rose, the world sank, and it happened during a single century, which means it happened fast, which means it was not natural erosion or climate change or any of the slow geological processes that reshape planets over millions of years. It happened within a human lifetime. Multiple human lifetimes watched the water rise. Multiple generations saw their cities swallowed by the ocean. And then, after the Void Century ended, after the world government consolidated power, the survivors were told to forget. They were told that the islands had always been islands. They were told that the drowned cities were myths. They were told that the 100 years of chaos was simply a gap in the historical record. Nothing to see here. Do not ask questions, or you will end up like O'Hara. But Vegapunk asked questions. Vegapunk spent his entire life asking questions, and in his final moments, he gave us the answer that reframes everything. The Great Flood was not a disaster. It was not a consequence. It was not even a weapon in the traditional sense of something used to destroy an enemy army. The Great Flood was an extinction event. It was designed to wipe out an entire civilization by eliminating the ground they stood on. You cannot fight a war if you are drowning. You cannot resist occupation if your cities are underwater. You cannot pass down history to your children if your children are dead at the bottom of the ocean. This is what the 20 kings did. This is how they won. They did not defeat the ancient kingdom in battle. They did not outsmart Joy Boy or outmaneuver whatever alliance he had built. They cheated. They flipped the table. They looked at a continent-spanning civilization that they could never conquer through conventional means, and they said, fine, if we cannot take it, we will sink it. We will raise the ocean until only the mountains remain. We will sit on those mountains and call ourselves celestial dragons. We will build a perfect ring of debris around the planet and name it the Red Line and pretend it was always there. We will create a world where the truth is literally buried beneath hundreds of meters of salt water, and anyone who tries to dig it up will be erased, just like Lulusia, just like O'Hara, just like every scholar and scientist and curious child who asked the wrong question at the wrong time. Vegapunk knew this. He knew it, and he said it, and then he died for saying it. His broadcast was not a revelation. It was a deathbed confession. It was the smartest man alive admitting that he had spent his entire career serving the people who committed the greatest genocide in human history. And the tragedy, the absolute gut-wrenching tragedy of Vegapunk's final moments, is that most of the world did not understand what he was telling them. They heard the sea level rose, and they thought, oh no, climate anxiety, very sad anyway. They did not connect the dots. They did not realize that he was describing a war crime on a planetary scale. But we are going to connect those dots. We are going to take Vegapunk's confession and combine it with the Lulusia constant and drag this conspiracy into the light where it belongs. Because the evidence does not stop with broadcasts and physics and dead scientists. The evidence is built into every location Oda has ever drawn. The evidence is architectural. The evidence is in the walls and the towers and the bridges and the ships that do not make sense unless you understand that this world is a graveyard pretending to be a paradise. So let us talk about the map. Let us talk about the actual shape of this world and why it makes absolutely zero sense unless you accept that someone built it this way. I want you to picture the one-piece planet in your mind-brain. You have seen it 1,000 times. The globe with the red line running vertically around it, pole to pole, a single unbroken continent that circles the entire planet like a belt. And then you have the Grand Line running horizontally, perpendicular to the red line, cutting through it at 2 points, creating the 4 blues that we all know and love. North blue, south blue, east blue, west blue, separated by these 2 massive geological features that make travel between them essentially impossible without either crossing the red line or navigating the Grand Line's insanity. This is the world. This is the setting. This is what every single One Piece fan has internalized as the natural geography of Oda's fictional planet. And it is complete and utter nonsense. I am not being hyperbolic here. I am not exaggerating for comedic effect. The One Piece world map is geologically impossible. It could not form, naturally under any circumstances, through any process, over any amount of time. Planets do not work this way. Continents do not work this way. Tectonic plates do not arrange themselves into perfect perpendicular rings around a globe like some kind of cosmic gift wrapping. The red line, as depicted, is a uniform wall of continental landmass that maintains consistent height and width across the entire circumference of the planet. Do you understand how insane that is? Do you understand that no geological process in the known universe could create a structure like that? Mountains form through plate collision. Continents drift through mantle convection. Land masses are irregular, chaotic, shaped by billions of years of volcanic activity and erosion and seismic shifts. They do not form perfect circles. They especially do not form perfect circles that are exactly perpendicular to other perfect circles. The Grand Line is somehow even worse. It is not just a line on a map. It is a region of ocean with completely unique magnetic properties, unpredictable weather patterns, and islands that each have their own isolated climate systems. An island of eternal winter sitting next to an island of eternal summer sitting next to an island where it rains lightning. The magnetic fields are so distorted. that normal compasses do not work, requiring special log poses that are tuned to individual islands. The currents are chaotic. The sea itself seems to operate under different rules than the rest of the planet's oceans, and all of this chaos is contained within a perfectly defined belt that runs around the globe, bordered on both sides by the calm belt. Ah, yes. The calm belt. Let us talk about the calm belt, because this is where the engineering becomes undeniable. The calm belt is two parallel strips of ocean, one on each side of the Grand Line, characterized by a complete absence of wind and sea currents. Nothing moves in the calm belt. The air is still. The water is stagnant. And oh, by the way, it is absolutely infested with sea kings, the giant monsters that make naval travel suicidal for anyone without the specific ability to either avoid them or survive their attacks. The calm belt is, functionally, an impassable barrier. It is a wall made of nothing. It is a fence constructed from absence. Now here is the question that should be keeping you up at night. Why? Why would two strips of ocean on either side of a specific geographic region have zero wind and zero current? That is not how oceans work. That is not how weather works. Wind is created by pressure differentials and the rotation of the planet. Currents are driven by temperature gradients and salinity differences and the Coriolis effect. You cannot just have a region of ocean where none of these forces apply. You cannot just have a belt of nothing unless something is actively suppressing those natural processes. Unless, of course, something is. Unless the calm belt is not a natural phenomenon at all, but an artificial boundary. Unless the seafloor of the calm belt is lined with something that disrupts normal oceanic function. Something like, say, massive deposits of sea stone. We know sea stone comes from the sea. We know it has properties that defy normal physics, nullifying devil fruit powers, and emitting the same energy wavelength as the ocean itself. We know it is found primarily in Wano, which is itself one of the most geologically suspicious locations in the entire series. What if the calm belt is not calm because of some magical coincidence? What if it is calm because the entire seafloor is polluted with sea stone, a remnant of whatever cataclysmic engineering project created the current world geography? What if the sea kings congregate there because the sea stone energy attracts them, or because they were deliberately placed there as guardians of the barrier? The world government has never seemed particularly concerned about the calm belt being impassable. They have ships coated with sea stone that can cross it freely, almost as if they know exactly what the calm belt is and exactly how to navigate it because their predecessors are the ones who created it in the first place. And then there is Reverse Mountain, the one point where the Grand Line and the Red Line intersect in a way that allows passage. The one gap in the barrier. And what happens at Reverse Mountain? Water flows uphill. Currents from all four blues converge on this single point and flow up the mountain, over the peak, and down into the Grand Line. This is presented as a natural wonder, a quirk of the One Piece world's unique geography. But there is nothing natural about water flowing uphill. There is nothing natural about four separate ocean currents, all converging on a single point with enough force to climb a mountain. That is a pump. That is a hydraulic system. That is engineered current control designed to funnel traffic into the Grand Line through a single choke point that can be monitored and, if necessary, closed. Fictional pirate creator man has given us a world that screams artificial at every level. The Red Line is too uniform. The Grand Line is too contained. The calm belt is too convenient. Reverse Mountain is too impossible. None of this formed naturally. All of this was built. And if it was built, then someone built it. And if someone built it, then they built it for a reason. And the reason, when you combine the geographical evidence with the Lulusia constant with Vegapunk's confession, becomes horrifyingly clear. This geography is a prison. This geography is a monument to genocide, The red line is the wall they hid behind while the world drowned. The grand line is the moat they filled with chaos to prevent anyone from reaching them. The calm belt is the fence that keeps the survivors separated and controllable. The four blues are not natural seas. They are quadrants. They are holding cells. They are the divided remnants of a world that was once whole, shattered and scattered and drowned until only the mountaintops remained. And those mountaintops? Those are the islands we have been visiting for over 1,000 chapters. Those are the kingdoms and nations and tiny rocks in the middle of nowhere where people live and die and dream of freedom without ever realizing that they are standing on the graves of their ancestors. The world of One Piece is not a world. It is a crime scene. And now that we understand the crime, now that we have established the method and the motive and the means, it is time to examine the bodies. It is time to look at the specific locations that Oda has shown us and see them for what they truly are. Not islands, not kingdoms, architectural fossils, the bones of a drowned civilization preserved in stone and steel, and the fading memories of a history that was supposed to be erased forever. Water 7 is drowning. This is not news. This is not a revelation. Anyone who watched the Water 7 arc knows that the city has a problem with water. The Aqua Laguna comes every year, massive tidal waves that crash over the lower levels of the city and force the population to evacuate upward. The entire architectural philosophy of Water 7 is built around this reality. The city is constructed in tiers, with the wealthiest residents living at the top and the poorest living at the bottom, closest to the water that might kill them at any moment. Iceberg, the mayor, is obsessed with raising the city higher and higher, building new levels on top of old ones, fighting a perpetual battle against the encroaching sea. We watched this. We understood this. We filed it away under interesting world building and moved on. But here is the thing. Here is the detail that changes everything when you look at it through the lens of the hydrogeological conspiracy. The people of Water 7 think their island is sinking. Iceberg thinks the island is sinking. Frankie thinks the island is sinking. Tom thought the island was sinking. This is the accepted explanation for why the Aqua Laguna keeps getting worse, why the lower levels of the city are more flooded than they used to be, why the entire population has to keep building upward just to stay dry. The island is sinking. Geological instability, natural processes. Nothing to worry about except the very real possibility of your home being underwater within a generation. They are wrong. The island is not sinking. The sea is rising. And I know that sounds like the same thing, but it is absolutely not the same thing, because one of those explanations is a local problem and the other is a global catastrophe. If Water 7 is sinking, that is a tragedy for Water 7. If the sea is rising, that is a tragedy for the entire world. And the evidence screams that it is the latter. The evidence screams that the Aqua Laguna is not a local tidal phenomenon, but a symptom of the same planetary flooding that Vegapunk described, the same process that drowned the ancient kingdom, the same rising waters that have been slowly, steadily, inexorably climbing for 800 years. Think about what we learned from Lulusia. One island pushed down equals 1 meter of global sea level rise. Now think about the void century. Think about how many islands, how many land masses, how many entire civilizations were crushed into the ocean floor by whatever ancient weapon the 20 kings were wielding. The sea level did not just rise once. It rose catastrophically, repeatedly, systematically, until the world we know today was created. And there is no reason to believe it stopped. There is no reason to believe the water reached some equilibrium point and decided to stay there. The Lulusia event proves that the process can still happen, that the mechanism still works, that the sea level can still rise whenever someone with the right weapon decides to push another island down. Water 7 is not sinking. Water 7 is experiencing the ongoing aftermath of the greatest flood in human history. The Aqua Laguna is not getting worse because the island is becoming less stable. The Aqua Laguna is getting worse because the ocean is still rising. Slowly. Imperceptibly on a day-to-day basis. But consistently, relentlessly, year after year, generation after generation, the water creeps higher. And the people of Water 7, bless their shipbuilding hearts, have been fighting against it without ever understanding what they are actually fighting. Which brings us to Tom. Tom the shipwright. Tom the builder of the Oro Jackson. Tom the man who was executed by the world government for the crime of building a ship for the pirate king. We remember Tom as a martyr, as a genius, as the mentor who shaped Frankie and Iceberg into the men they became. But we do not talk enough about Tom's other project. We do not talk enough about the sea train. The Puffing Tom was revolutionary. It was a train that ran on the ocean, connecting Water 7 to the surrounding islands in a way that had never been possible before. We were told this was about commerce, about trade, about revitalizing Water 7's economy after years of decline. And sure, yes, that is what it accomplished. But Anime Autopsy wants you to consider an alternative interpretation. Anime Autopsy wants you to consider that Tom was not building a trade route. Tom was building an evacuation system. Look at the timing. Look at the context. Tom was a shipwright who understood the ocean better than almost anyone alive. He was also a fish man, a member of a species that lives underwater and would have intimate knowledge of sea level changes. Tom would have known. He would have seen the evidence that the surface dwellers missed. He would have understood that the Aqua Laguna was not a local anomaly, but a warning sign. And what did he do with that knowledge? He did not build a wall. He did not try to raise the city. He built a way out. He built a mechanism for mass transportation that could move large numbers of people quickly across the open ocean to other islands. He built the infrastructure for a refugee crisis that he knew was coming. The world government executed him for building the Oro Jackson. But the world government also took control of the sea train system. They use it now. They regulate it. They decide who rides and where the trains go, almost as if they recognized what Tom had actually created and decided they needed to own it. Almost as if an evacuation system is only useful if you control who gets evacuated. And then there is Iceberg. Poor, paranoid, perpetually stressed Iceberg, who inherited Tom's legacy and Tom's burden and has spent his entire adult life fighting against the water. Iceberg does not just maintain Water 7, he rebuilds it constantly. He raises it. He reinforces it. He is engaged in an endless architectural arms race against an opponent he does not fully understand. The fandom treats this as a character quirk, as the obsessive perfectionism of a man who really loves his city. But what if it is something else? What if Iceberg inherited more than just Tom's shipyard? What if he inherited the knowledge, or at least the suspicion, that Water 7 is not dealing with normal tides? What if his desperate, unending construction projects are not civic pride, but survival instinct? What if Iceberg is building an ark without ever admitting to himself why he needs one? Water 7 is the first architectural fossil we are examining, and it tells us everything we need to know about how this world has been coping with the flood. The people adapt. The people build higher. The people create technologies and systems and entire economic structures around the reality of rising water. And they never, ever, ever ask why the water is rising in the first place. They cannot ask. Because asking that question leads to the void century, and the void century is forbidden, and anyone who digs too deep ends up like O'Hara. So they build. They survive. They tell themselves comforting lies about sinking islands and unusual tides. And the water keeps rising. Wano knows. That is the difference between Water 7 and Wano. That is the distinction that elevates Wano from interesting isolated nation to smoking gun evidence of the hydro-geological conspiracy. The people of Water 7 are fighting the flood without understanding it. They build and adapt and cope with rising waters while telling themselves comfortable stories about geological instability and unusual tidal patterns. But Wano built walls. Wano built massive, towering, ridiculous walls around the entire country. Walls so tall and so thick that the nation has remained completely isolated from the rest of the world for centuries. And the fandom, myself included, spent years assuming those walls were about isolationism. We assumed the Kozuki clan and the shoguns who followed them simply wanted to keep the outside world out. Xenophobia, cultural preservation, political independence. Pick your explanation, they all made surface-level sense. But then Sukiyaki took Robin downstairs. Chapter 1053. One of the most quietly devastating chapters in the entire Wano arc. And it barely got discussed because everyone was too busy losing their minds over bounties and admiral arrivals and whatever else was happening at the time. But Anime Autopsy remembers. Anime Autopsy watched that scene and felt his entire understanding of Wano crack like an egg. Because Sukiyaki, the former shogun, the man who faked his death and spent decades hiding in shame, took Nico Robin underground. He took her beneath the current Wano. And what did they find? They found old Wano. They found the original nation, submerged, abandoned, preserved underwater like a corpse in a jar. They found buildings and streets and an entire civilization sitting beneath the ocean's surface, directly below the Wano we had spent 100 chapters exploring. The current Wano is not Wano. The current Wano is a refugee camp. Do you understand what Oda showed us in that scene? Do you understand the implications? The Wano we know, the Wano with the flower capital and the beast pirates and the samurai and the factories, is built on top of a mountain. It is the high ground. It is where the survivors fled when the original Wano drowned. The walls are not there to keep the outside world out. The walls are there to keep the ocean out. They are dikes. They are flood barriers. They are the desperate architectural response of a people who watched their homeland sink beneath the waves and said, "Never again. We will build walls so high that the water can never reach us. We will isolate ourselves from the world because the world tried to drown us once and we will not give it a second chance." This is why Wano has been closed for 800 years. Not because of arrogance. Not because of fear of outsiders. Because they remember. Because somewhere in their cultural memory, buried beneath centuries of tradition and ritual and the deliberate suppression of historical truth, the people of Wano remember that the sea is the enemy. The sea rose and swallowed their ancestors. The sea is not to be trusted. The walls must stay up. The borders must stay closed. The water must never, ever be allowed inside. And then there is Pluton. Oh, Pluton. The ancient weapon we have been hearing about since Alabasta. The warship capable of destroying entire islands, supposedly built in Water 7. Supposedly the thing that Frankie has the blueprints for. Supposedly one of the 3 weapons that could threaten the entire world. We spent decades theorizing about Pluton. We imagined it as some kind of super battleship, a nautical death machine, the ultimate expression of military naval power. And then Sukiyaki, in that same underground tour, casually mentioned that Pluton is beneath Wano. It has been there the whole time, buried under the country, hidden beneath the floodline. The implications are staggering. Pluton was not built in Water 7. Or if it was moved to a Wano before the flood. Pluton is not a weapon that was created after the Void Century to threaten the world. Pluton is an ancient kingdom artifact that survived the drowning because it was stored in a place that was specifically designed to resist the rising waters. Wano did not just build walls to protect its people. Wano built walls to protect the weapon that might one day undo what was done. Think about the Kozuki clan. Think about their role in the grand conspiracy. They are the ones who created the poneglyphs. They are the ones who carved the true history into indestructible stones because they knew that paper and memory and oral tradition would not survive what was coming. They knew the flood was coming. They knew the world government would rewrite history. They knew everything would be erased. So they carved the truth into rock, scattered those rocks across the world, and then they built a fortress nation on top of a mountain, surrounded it with walls, and waited. They waited 800 years for someone who could read the stones. They waited for someone who could piece together the truth. They waited for the alliance that would finally come to Wano, liberate it from Kaido's occupation, and presumably at some point in the future use Pluton to do whatever Pluton is supposed to do. And what is Pluton supposed to do? We still do not know the specifics. We know it is a warship. We know it is powerful enough to destroy islands. But in the context of the hydro-geological conspiracy, in the context of a world that was deliberately drowned, perhaps Pluton's true purpose is not destruction. Perhaps Pluton is the counterweight. Perhaps Pluton is designed to do what the ancient weapons did in reverse. If Uranus, or whatever sky-based weapon, can push islands down and raise the sea level, then maybe Pluton can pull islands up. Maybe Pluton can lower the sea level. Maybe Pluton is the key to draining the floodwaters and restoring the world to what it was before the 20 kings drowned everything. This is speculation. This is cockery of the highest order. But the evidence points in this direction. Wano protected Pluton for 800 years. Wano built walls to survive the flood. Wano remembers, even if that memory has been corrupted and fragmented over the centuries. And now Luffy has liberated Wano, and Robin knows where Pluton is. And somewhere down the line, this is all going to connect to the final confrontation with the world government and the restoration of the drowned world. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We have more architectural fossils to examine. We have more crime scene evidence to analyze. Because Wano is not the only location that does not make sense unless you understand the flood. There are other structures, other places, other remnants of the pre-flood world that Oda has hidden in plain sight. And the most damning of them all is sitting at the bottom of the ocean, full of prisoners, run by the world government itself. Impel Down was never meant to be underwater. Let me describe Impel Down to you as if you had never seen it before, as if you were an archaeologist from our world, examining the structure without any context about the One Piece universe. What would you see? You would see a tower, a massive, multi-leveled tower descending deep into the ocean. The structure has distinct floors, each with its own purpose, its own climate, its own internal logic. The architecture is complex. The engineering is sophisticated. The whole thing is clearly designed for human habitation, with cells and corridors and administrative areas, and even a kitchen run by a warden who makes poisoned meals. This is not a primitive dungeon carved into rock. This is a skyscraper. This is the kind of vertical construction that requires advanced planning, advanced materials, and a civilization capable of building at scale. And it is entirely underwater. Now, if you were that archaeologist, what conclusion would you draw? Would you assume that an ancient civilization decided to build a massive tower at the bottom of the ocean? Would you believe that people who breathe air and walk on land deliberately constructed a facility that requires specialized equipment just to access? Or would you conclude, based on basic logic and common sense, that this tower was built on dry land and then submerged? That the ocean rose to swallow it, just like it swallowed everything else, and the structure simply happened to survive because it was tall enough and sturdy enough to withstand the flooding? Impel Down is not a prison that was built underwater. Impel Down is a building from the ancient kingdom that got drowned along with everything else. The world government did not construct it. The world government found it. They found this massive, preserved structure sitting beneath the waves, and they thought, well, this is convenient. We need somewhere to put our prisoners, somewhere escape-proof, somewhere that the general population can never reach, somewhere that reminds everyone who enters it that the world government controls even the depths of the ocean. And so they repurposed it. They turned someone else's skyscraper into their torture facility. They filled the floors with demons and poison and fire and ice. Not because the original builders intended those things, but because the world government wanted to make the drowned tower into a monument of suffering. Think about the levels of Impel Down. Think about how they're organized. Crimson Hell, Wild Beast Hell, Starvation Hell, Blazing Hell, Freezing Hell, and then the secret level 6 at the very bottom. Each level has its own environmental gimmick, its own method of torture, its own way of breaking prisoners. But here is the thing that always bothered me. Here is the detail that does not make sense if you assume Impel Down was purpose-built as a prison. Why would you build a prison with wildly different climate zones on each floor? Why would the original architects design a building where one level is burning hot and another is freezing cold? That is insane. That is wildly impractical. That is the kind of design that only makes sense if the building was not originally designed as a prison at all. What if the levels of Impel Down were something else before the flood? What if the different climates are remnants of the building's original purpose, repurposed by the world government into instruments of torture? What if Crimson Hell was a garden and the world government planted sword trees? What if Blazing Hell was an industrial level, a foundry or a power plant, and the world government just cranked the heat up to lethal levels? What if Freezing Hell was cold storage, a preservation facility, and the government decided that prisoners could survive there too? The architecture of Impel Down screams adaptation. It screams that someone took an existing structure and twisted it into something cruel. And at the very bottom, level 6, the level that does not officially exist, is where they keep the prisoners who are too dangerous and too embarrassing to acknowledge. The ones erased from history. The ones whose very existence threatens the world government's narrative. Almost as if the deepest level of the drowned tower is reserved for people who, like the tower itself, are not supposed to exist anymore. Almost as if level 6 is the world government burying its mistakes inside a building that is itself a buried mistake. But Impel Down is not the only architectural anomaly. Let us talk about Long Ring Longland, because Long Ring Longland is weird in a way that nobody seems to discuss enough. The Foxy Pirates arc is not exactly beloved. People tend to skip it on rewatches, fast forward through the Davy Backfight nonsense, and move on to Water 7. I understand. I sympathise. But Long Ring Longland itself, the location where that arc takes place, is fascinating when you look at it through the flood lens. Long Ring Longland is an archipelago of tiny islands that are only accessible during low tide. When the tide is high, the islands are separated by impassable stretches of ocean. The nomadic tribes who live there have adapted their entire existence around this tidal cycle. They wait. They move from island to island when the water recedes. They build their lives around the rhythm of a sea that gives and takes land on a schedule. Oda presented this as a quirky environmental detail, a fun bit of world building to justify the arc's structure. But what if it is something else? What if Long Ring Longland is not experiencing normal tides? What if the people there are not adapting to a natural cycle, but to the residual effects of the flood? What if, when the tide goes out at Long Ring Longland, we are seeing a glimpse of the true world? The world that exists beneath the current sea level? The world that used to be dry land before the 20 Kings drowned it? The nomads of Long Ring. Longland are living on the boundary. They are existing in the space between the flooded world and the world that was. Every time the tide recedes, they walk on land that used to be above water permanently. Every time the tide rises, they retreat to their tiny mountaintop islands and wait for the ocean to give them their world back. They have been doing this for generations, for centuries, never questioning why their home works this way, never asking what those stretches of revealed land used to be. And then there is Enies Lobby, the judicial island, the seat of world government justice, where criminals are tried and condemned before being sent to Impel Down. And in the centre of Enies Lobby, there is a hole, A massive, bottomless pit that drops into nothing. Water pours into it constantly from the surrounding waterfalls, and none of that water ever fills the pit. It just falls and falls and falls into an abyss that should not exist. Where does the water go? Seriously. Where does it go? This is not a rhetorical question. This is a physics question. Water pours into Enies Lobby's pit perpetually, and the pit never fills, which means the water is going somewhere. It is draining. It is being removed from the surface and deposited elsewhere. And if there is a drainage system at Enies Lobby, a place where water is constantly being siphoned away, then maybe that drainage system is the counterpart to whatever mechanism raised the sea level in the first place. Maybe Enies Lobby is sitting on top of a valve, a release point, a geological drain plug that was installed during the Void Century as part of the terraforming project. Maybe the world government built their courthouse on top of it specifically to control access. To make sure nobody ever goes down there and finds out what happens when you pull the plug. The architectural fossils are everywhere. Water 7, Wano. Impel Down. Long Ring, Long Land. Enies Lobby. Each one tells the same story from a different angle. Each one whispers the same truth that the world government has spent 8 centuries trying to silence. The world drowned. The survivors built on the wreckage. And somewhere, buried beneath the waves and the lies and the 800 years of enforced amnesia, there is a way to bring it all back up. We have established the crime. We have examined the evidence. We have walked through the architectural fossils and seen the fingerprints of genocide on every waterlogged stone. But a crime requires criminals. A conspiracy requires conspirators. And now it is time to talk about the people who did this. Not just the 20 kings in the abstract, not just the vague notion of the world government, but the specific mechanisms by which a group of power-hungry monarchs managed to drown an entire planet and build themselves a lifeboat while everyone else choked on salt water. Let us talk about the red line. I touched on this earlier, but I did not give it the full autopsy it deserves. Because the red line is not just geologically impossible. It is not just suspiciously uniform. The red line is, when you really stop and think about it, the most audacious construction project in the history of any fictional universe. We are talking about a continuous wall of continental landmass that wraps around the entire circumference of a planet. We are talking about a structure that maintains consistent height from pole to pole, that rises thousands of meters above sea level at every point, that has somehow resisted erosion and tectonic activity and every other geological force for 800 years. This is not a continent. Continents do not work this way. This is a wall. This is a dam. This is a monument built by people who had access to resources and labour on a scale that defies comprehension. So who built it? Who could possibly have built it? Giants. The answer is giants. The answer has always been giants. And Oda has been telling us this for years, hiding it in plain sight like he reframes, like he hides everything else, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Because there is a giant in the One Piece world who has a very specific epithet. A giant whose title tells us exactly what his species used to do before they were reduced to the marginalized, scattered, largely irrelevant population we see in the current era. His name is Oars, and his title is Continent Puller. Continent Puller. Let that sink in. Let the implications wash over you like the floodwaters of the Void Century. Oars was not called Giant Among Giants, or the Colossal Warrior, or any of the generic titles you might expect for a creature of his size. He was called the Continent Puller. He was named for his ability to move landmasses, to drag entire continents across the surface of the planet. And if Oars could do it, then his ancestors could do it. And if his ancestors could do it, then the 20 kings had access to a labour force capable of reshaping the geography of the world. This is the cockery. This is the theory that keeps me up at night, staring at maps and panels and trying to figure out exactly how it worked. The red line is not a natural formation. The red line is debris. It is the accumulated wreckage of the landmasses that were crushed and drowned during the Void Century, piled up and compacted and shaped into a continuous ring by an army of giants working under the direction of the 20 kings. The ancestors of Oz did not just pull continents, they built the Red Line. They took the shattered remains of the ancient kingdom's territories and stacked them into a wall so high that the floodwaters could never reach the people standing on top. Think about the construction timeline. The Void Century was 100 years. 100 years of war, of flooding, of deliberate geological destruction, but also 100 years of construction. 100 years during which the 20 kings needed somewhere to put themselves and their loyal populations while they drowned everyone else. They could not just sit on ships and wait. They needed land. They needed high ground. They needed a place that would remain above the rising waters, no matter how high those waters rose. So they built it. They commanded the giants to build it. They took the corpses of the nations they were destroying and transformed them into the foundation of their new world order. This explains why the Red Line is uniform. Natural continents are not uniform because natural geological processes are chaotic and random. But construction is deliberate. Construction can be planned. If you are building a wall using the debris of crushed landmasses, you can control the height. You can ensure consistency. You can create the impossible geological feature that we see in the One Piece world specifically because you are not relying on geology at all. You are relying on labor. You are relying on giants with the strength to move mountains, working for a century under the direction of architects who knew exactly what shape they wanted the new world to take. And where are the giants now? Where is this species that was once so powerful, so essential, that they literally built the continent upon which the celestial dragons live? They are in Elbaf. They are isolated, marginalized, largely disconnected from world affairs. They have a proud warrior culture that seems oddly focused on honor and combat rather than the world-shaping power their ancestors wielded. Almost as if they have been deliberately contained. Almost as if the world government, after using the giants to build their paradise, decided that a species capable of moving continents was too dangerous to leave running around unsupervised. The giants are not warriors by nature. The giants are builders. They are construction workers. They are the descendants of the people who built the Red Line, and they have been systematically stripped of that legacy, pushed to the margins of the world, allowed to play at being Vikings, while the true history of their species is buried along with everything else from the Void Century. Elbaf is not a homeland. Elbaf is a reservation. It is where the world government put the giants after they were done being useful, and it is where they have stayed for 800 years, never quite remembering that they used to reshape the world with their bare hands. This is the Red Line conspiracy. This is the truth that sits beneath Mariéjois, beneath the feet of the celestial dragons, beneath the entire structure of world power in one piece. The land they stand on is not a continent. It is a mass grave. It is the compacted remains of every nation the 20 kings destroyed, piled up by enslaved giants, formed into the shape of a ring so that the perpetrators of the greatest genocide in history could live above the evidence of their crimes. The Red Line is not geography. The Red Line is a monument. It is the 20 kings saying, "We drowned the world, we built our throne on the bodies, and we will sit here forever while everyone else fights over the mountaintops we left behind." And they have been sitting there for 800 years, wearing their bubble helmets, calling themselves gods, pretending that the lower world is beneath their notice when the truth is that the lower world is beneath the ocean because they put it there. The celestial dragons are not merely corrupt aristocrats. They are not simply spoiled descendants of ancient conquerors. They are the inheritors of a genocide so complete that the crime itself was erased from memory. And every single day they spend in Marie-Joie, every breath they take inside those ridiculous bubbles is a continuation of that crime, a celebration of it, a reminder that they won and the world lost, and nobody is ever going to do anything about it. Or so they think. Now let us talk about the bubbles. You know, the ones. Those ridiculous glass helmets that every celestial dragon wears whenever they descend from Marie-Joie to interact with the filthy commoners below. We first saw them properly in Sabaody Archipelago when St. Charlos shot a man for not kneeling fast enough, and the entire fandom collectively decided that these were the most hateable characters Oda had ever created. The helmets were presented as the ultimate symbol of their arrogance. The celestial dragons wear them because they refuse to breathe the same air as regular people. They consider themselves so pure, so elevated, so fundamentally different from the rest of humanity that even sharing an atmosphere with commoners is beneath them. This is the explanation we were given. This is the explanation the fandom accepted. And it is, like so many things in One Piece, a lie that contains a deeper truth. The helmets are not about air purity. The helmets are diving suits. Look at them. Actually, look at them. They are spherical glass enclosures that completely seal the head from the outside environment. They have internal air supplies. They are designed to maintain a breathable atmosphere inside while keeping whatever is outside from getting in. This is not the design of someone who is merely squeamish about breathing common air. This is the design of someone who expects to be surrounded by water. The celestial dragons have been wearing these helmets for 800 years. Generation after generation, parent to child, the tradition continues. And traditions like this do not emerge from nowhere. Traditions like this are cultural memory. They are rituals that encode historical truth into repeated behavior, preserved even after the original meaning has been forgotten. The celestial dragons wear bubble helmets because their ancestors wore them. Their ancestors wore them because their ancestors needed them. And their ancestors needed them because 800 years ago, when the world was drowning, the founders of Marie-Joie watched the ocean rise from behind glass and rubber and sealed containers of breathable air. The helmets are ceremonial diving suits. They are a cultural echo of the Void Century, a time when the 20 kings and their followers needed protective equipment to survive the flood they were creating. The original celestial dragons did not look down on the lower world from positions of abstract superiority. They looked down through diving masks while the lower world literally filled with water. They watched civilizations drown. They watched millions of people die. And they did it from inside sealed bubbles, because the air outside was full of spray and chaos and the screams of the dying. 800 years later, the descendants still wear the bubbles. They do not remember why. They have constructed elaborate justifications about purity and superiority and the unworthiness of common air. But the behavior itself, the physical act of sealing themselves away from the outside atmosphere, is a direct inheritance from ancestors who needed that seal to survive. The celestial dragons are cosplaying as conquerors. They are wearing the equipment of genocide without understanding what it was originally for. They are children playing dress-up in their great-great-great-grandparents' war crimes. And this connects to something else, something that the fandom has never adequately explained. The bubble technology of Sabaody Archipelago. Sabaody is the only island in the world where bubbles naturally form from the mangrove roots. These bubbles are versatile, practical, and essential for coating ships that want to descend to Fishman Island. The world government controls Sabaody. The world government has always controlled Sabaody. And the world government uses this bubble technology extensively, not just for travel, but for the helmets that their highest aristocracy wears every single day. This is not a coincidence. The bubble technology is Void Century technology. It is part of the same engineering package that created the Red Line, that weaponized the ocean, that reshaped the geography of the world. The 20 kings did not just happen to discover a useful island with convenient natural properties after they won their war. They created Sabaody, or they cultivated it, or they transplanted whatever organisms produce the bubble resin to that specific location, specifically because they needed a renewable source of the material that had allowed them to survive the flood. The bubbles are not natural. The bubbles are infrastructure. And the fact that Sabaody sits directly adjacent to the red line, directly above Fishman Island, directly at the choke point where all Grand Line traffic must pass, tells you everything about how important this location is to the world government's continued control of the world. But let us return to the psychology. Let us talk about why the celestial dragons behave the way they do, why they call the surface world the lower world, why they treat everyone beneath Mariéjois as subhuman garbage. The common explanation is that they are simply arrogant. They have been raised from birth to believe they are superior, so they act superior. This is true, but it is incomplete, because arrogance alone does not explain the specific flavor of their contempt. Arrogance alone does not explain why they seem genuinely terrified of the lower world, even as they claim dominion over it. The celestial dragons are afraid. They are afraid because, in their cultural memory, the lower world is death. The lower world is where the water rose. The lower world is where everyone who was not on the red line drowned. The lower world is a mass grave, and the celestial dragons have spent 800 years avoiding it the same way you might avoid walking through a cemetery at night. Their contempt is a defense mechanism. Their cruelty is overcompensation. They dehumanize the people below because acknowledging the humanity of those people would require acknowledging what their ancestors did to the ancestors of those people. It would require looking at the descendants of survivors and recognizing that those survivors only exist because they were lucky enough to reach high ground before the water got them. The helmets are armor, not physical armor, psychological armor. The celestial dragons seal themselves away from the lower world because engaging with it directly, breathing its air, walking on its ground, would force them to confront the truth of their own history. The bubbles keep the outside out, yes. But more importantly, they keep the celestial dragons in. They keep them trapped in a hermetically sealed delusion where they are gods descended from gods, rather than the inheritors of a monstrous crime pretending that the crime never happened. This is why characters like Donquay Kotem are so significant. This is why his transformation from typical celestial dragon to someone capable of empathy and moral action matters so much. Mjosgard took off the helmet. Not literally, although I believe we have seen him without it. But psychologically, he removed the barrier. He allowed himself to see the lower world as it actually is, rather than as the death-soaked nightmare his cultural programming told him it was. And in doing so, he became capable of being a person rather than a symbol. The celestial dragons can be redeemed, the helmets can come off, but the world government does not want them off. The world government needs the celestial dragons to stay sealed, stay terrified, stay convinced that the lower world is beneath them. Because if the celestial dragons ever collectively realized what they were, what their ancestors did, what those helmets actually represent, some of them might start asking questions, and questions lead to poneglyphs, and poneglyphs lead to the truth, and the truth leads to the end of everything the world government has built on top of the bodies. Here is something that should terrify you. The world government is still building. 800 years after the Void Century. 800 years after they drowned the world, constructed the Red Line, established their unassailable position at the top of the planetary hierarchy. 800 years of total domination, of absolute control over information and geography and the flow of human history. And they are still building. They are still engaged in massive infrastructure projects. They are still pouring resources into construction on a scale that makes no sense unless you understand what they are preparing for. Tequila Wolf. You remember Tequila Wolf? It appeared briefly during the post-Sabaody separation, when the straw hats were scattered across the world by Kuma. Robin ended up there, enslaved, forced to work on the construction of a massive bridge. The world government has been building this bridge for 700 years. 700 years of continuous construction, 700 years of slave labor, of countless generations being born and dying on a bridge that has no apparent endpoint. We saw Robin there. We felt appropriately horrified. We filed it away as another example of world government cruelty and moved on. But anime autopsy does not move on. Anime autopsy obsesses. And the more I obsess over Tequila Wolf, the less sense it makes as a vanity project, and the more sense it makes as something else entirely. Because here is the question that nobody asks. Why would you build a bridge for 700 years? The world government is not stupid. Evil, yes. Corrupt, absolutely. But not stupid. They control the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in the world. They have access to resources and technology and knowledge that nobody else possesses. They do not do things without reason. They do not spend 7 centuries on a project that serves no purpose. So what is the purpose of Tequila Wolf? What are they connecting? What are they trying to reach? The answer, when you view it through the hydro-geological lens, becomes obvious. They are connecting islands. They are building above the Malay's waterline. They are creating infrastructure that will survive the continued rise of the ocean. The water is still rising. This is the secret that Tequila Wolf reveals. This is the admission that the world government has been hiding in plain sight for the entire series. The flood did not stop after the Void Century. The flood has never stopped. The mechanism that raised the sea level 800 years ago is still operating, still slowly, incrementally pushing the ocean higher. And the world government knows this. They have always known this. They are the ones who started it, after all. They understand exactly what they did and exactly what the long-term consequences are. And those consequences are that eventually, inevitably, the water will rise high enough to threaten even them. Tequila Wolf is not a bridge. Tequila Wolf is an escape route. It is the world government's backup plan for when the red line is no longer high enough. It is them saying, we need to connect the remaining high ground locations before the sea swallows everything else. We need routes that do not rely on ships, because ships can be sunk, ships can be blocked. Ships require navigating an ocean that is becoming more dangerous with every meter the water rises. We need solid ground. We need bridges. We need infrastructure that sits above the floodline and connects our strongholds so that we can maintain control even as the world continues to drown. 700 years. They have been building for 700 years, and the bridge still is not finished. This tells you something about the scale of what they are trying to accomplish. This tells you something about how desperate they actually are, because 700 years is not the timeline of a casual construction project. 700 years is the timeline of a civilization fighting for its survival against a threat that it cannot stop, only delay. The world government cannot stop the flood. They started it, but they cannot stop it. Whatever mechanism they used to raise the sea level during the Void Century, whatever ancient weapon or combination of weapons they employed, it is still running. It is still operating. And they do not have the ability to turn it off. Maybe the controls were destroyed. Maybe the knowledge was lost. Maybe the thing that could stop it is the same thing that is now called the One Piece, and it has been sitting on Laugh-Tale for 800 years, waiting for someone to come and use it. But whatever the reason, the world government is stuck. They are trapped on their artificial continent, watching the water creep higher, building bridges and walls and whatever else they can think of to buy themselves more time. This is why they destroyed Lulusia. Not because Lulusia knew some dangerous secret, not because the people there posed some immediate threat, but because pushing Lulusia down raised the sea level by exactly 1 meter, and the world government needed that data. They needed to know if the mechanism still worked. They needed to confirm that they could still use the ancient weapon if necessary, could still displace islands if they needed to make adjustments to their geography. Lulusia was an experiment. It was a test run. And the result of that test was confirmation that the world government can still drown anyone they want to drown, whenever they want to drown them. But here is the tragedy. Here is the bitter irony that underlies this entire conspiracy. The world government has been fighting the flood for 800 years, and they are losing. They have all the power, all the resources, all the control, and they are still losing. The water is still rising. The islands are still shrinking. Tequila Wolf is still unfinished. And somewhere, out there in the world they tried to destroy, the remnants of the ancient kingdom left behind the tools to undo everything. Left behind the poneglyphs that tell the truth. Left behind the ancient weapons that could restore the world. Left behind the One Piece itself, whatever it turns out to be, sitting at the end of the Grand Line like a reset button for a planet that has been drowning for almost a millennium. The world government knows this. They have spent 8 centuries trying to prevent anyone from reaching Laugh Tale. They have erased history, burned scholars, assassinated anyone who gets too close to the truth. But they cannot find Laugh Tale themselves. They cannot destroy the thing that could destroy them. All they can do is build. All they can do is prepare. All they can do is extend bridges and reinforce walls and pray that the water does not rise faster than they can adapt. Tequila Wolf is not a symbol of cruelty. I mean, it is that too. The slave labour is horrific. The 700 years of human suffering is unconscionable. But more than cruelty, Tequila Wolf is a symbol of fear. It is the world government admitting, in stone and steel, and the broken bodies of generations of workers, that they are afraid. They are afraid of the ocean they weaponized. They are afraid of the flood they started. And they are afraid that one day someone is going to show up with the key to drain it all, and there will be nothing they can do to stop them. We have spent a lot of time talking about the crime. We have examined the evidence, identified the perpetrators, traced the conspiracy from the drowned ruins of the ancient kingdom to the bubble-wrapped aristocrats of Mariégeois. But now it is time to talk about the solution. Now it is time to talk about how this story ends. And to do that, we need to fundamentally reconsider what the ancient weapons actually are. The fandom has always treated the ancient weapons as exactly what their name suggests. Weapons. Tools of destruction. Pluton is a warship that can destroy islands. Poseidon is a mermaid who can command sea kings to annihilate fleets. Uranus is presumably something equally devastating, some sky-based power capable of erasing civilizations from existence. We have framed these things as instruments of war, because that is how the world government talks about them. That is how the story presents them. They are dangerous. They must be controlled. They could destroy the world. But what if that framing is propaganda? What if the ancient weapons are not weapons at all, in the sense that we understand weapons? What if they are something else entirely? Something that the world government has deliberately misrepresented because the truth is even more dangerous than the lie. The ancient weapons are terraforming tools. Think about what we actually know, not what we have been told, but what we have seen with our own eyes through the pages of the manga. Poseidon is Shirahoshi. Shirahoshi can communicate with and command the Sea Kings, those massive creatures that populate the Calm Belt and the deepest parts of the ocean. What can Sea Kings do? They can move through water with incredible speed and force. They can navigate currents. They can, if directed properly, probably influence the flow of the ocean itself. Poseidon is not a weapon designed to destroy ships. Poseidon is a control system for ocean currents. Poseidon is the ability to direct the movement of water on a planetary scale. Now think about Pluton. We know it is a warship. We know it was built in Water 7 originally, or at least designed there. We know it is capable of destroying islands. But destroying islands is just one application of whatever power Pluton possesses. What if Pluton's real function is not destruction but displacement? What if Pluton can move landmasses, raise them up or push them down, alter the tectonic configuration of the planet itself? We know this is possible because the Lulusia event proves it. Something pushed that island into the Earth's crust. Something displaced that landmass and raised the sea level. If that something can push down, then logically, something else can push up. That something else might be Pluton. And then there is Uranus. We know almost nothing about Uranus except that it exists and that it is associated with the sky. The name comes from the Greek god of the heavens. The destruction of Lulusia came from above, from something in the sky, from what many fans assume is Uranus itself. But even if Uranus can destroy islands from orbit, that does not mean destruction is its primary purpose. What if Uranus controls weather? What if Uranus can manipulate atmospheric conditions, redirect winds, create or eliminate storms? The calm belt has no wind. The Grand Line has chaotic, unpredictable weather patterns. What if these conditions are not natural but artificial, maintained by a system that was put in place during the Void Century and has been running on autopilot ever since? 3 weapons, 3 systems. One controls the ocean currents, one controls the land masses, one controls the atmosphere. Together, they do not form an arsenal. They form a planetary engineering suite. They form the tools necessary to reshape the geography of an entire world. And this is exactly what happened during the Void Century. The 20 kings did not conquer the ancient kingdom with armies and battleships. They conquered it with terraforming. They used Poseidon to redirect the oceans. They used Pluton to crush the continents. They used Uranus to reshape the sky and create the calm belt barriers. They did not fight a war. They remodeled the planet. This reframing changes everything. Because if the ancient weapons are terraforming tools rather than simple instruments of destruction, then they can terraform in both directions. They can flood the world, yes, but they can also drain it. They can raise land masses as easily as they can sink them. They can restore the calm belts to normal ocean conditions. They can bring back the unified continent that Vegapunk told us existed before the Void Century. The weapons are not inherently good or evil. They are tools. And like all tools, their morality depends entirely on who is using them and for what purpose. The 20 kings used them to drown the world and build their paradise on the wreckage. But Joy Boy, whoever Joy Boy was, had a different plan. Joy Boy wanted to use them to undo the damage. Joy Boy wanted to restore the world to what it was before the flood. And somewhere along the line, Joy Boy failed. The weapons were scattered. Poseidon was lost to the Fishman royal line, passed down through generations until it finally manifested in Shirahoshi. Pluton was hidden beneath Wano, guarded by the Kazuki clan, waiting for the day when someone could retrieve it. Uranus went somewhere, into the hands of the world government presumably, where it has been kept locked away for 8 centuries, until Imu decided to test it on Lulusia. The ancient weapons are not the threat. The ancient weapons are the solution. They are the tools that Joy Boy intended to use to save the world, and they are the tools that Luffy will eventually use to finish what Joy Boy started. This is why the world government is so desperate to control them. Not because they fear the weapons being used against them militarily, because they fear the weapons being used to undo the flood, because they fear someone gathering all 3 pieces of the terraforming suite and pressing the reset button on 800 years of geographical manipulation. The One Piece is not treasure. The One Piece is not gold or jewels or even information in the traditional sense. The One Piece is the activation key. It is whatever mechanism allows the ancient weapons to work in concert, to operate as a unified system rather than 3 separate tools. It is the thing that Joy Boy left on Laugh Tale, waiting for the person who would be worthy to use it, waiting for someone who would understand what the world was supposed to be and have the will to make it that way again. Roger found it. Roger understood. And Roger laughed, because he was too early. Because Poseidon had not been born yet, because the mermaid princess who could command the Sea Kings would not exist for another decade. Roger stood in front of the solution to everything and realized that he could not use it. All he could do was wait. All he could do was start a new age of piracy and hope that someone else would be born at the right time, find the right crew, gather the right weapons, and finish the job that had been waiting for 800 years. That someone is Luffy. And we are watching the final approach. Let us talk about Noah. Noah is the ship that sits at the bottom of Fishman Island. It is massive, larger than any vessel we have seen in the series, except perhaps Thriller Bark. It was built during the Void Century, designed to be pulled by Sea Kings, and it has been sitting there for 800 years waiting. The fishmen have guarded it. They have maintained it. They have treated it as sacred, even though none of them truly remember what it is for. And the fandom, reasonably enough, has always assumed that Noah was built for the fishmen, that it was a vessel designed to carry the fishman population to the surface world, that the promise between Joy Boy and the fishman royal family was a promise to bring them up from the depths, to give them a place under the sun, to end their centuries of discrimination and isolation. This interpretation makes sense on the surface. It fits the themes of the Fishman Island arc, the dream of coexistence, the hope that one day fishmen and humans will live together as equals. But it does not make sense when you examine it through the hydro-geological lens. It does not make sense when you ask the simple question of why a ship designed to carry fishmen to the surface would need to be so impossibly large. Fishmen can swim. Fishmen are not limited to ships the way humans are. If you wanted to move the fishman population to the surface, you would not need a massive ark. You would just need to convince them to swim up. They could do it whenever they wanted. The only thing preventing fishmen from living on the surface is discrimination, not logistics. So why build Noah? Why build a ship the size of a small island, designed to be pulled by Sea Kings if the intended passengers could move themselves? Unless the intended passengers could not move themselves. Unless the intended passengers were not fishmen at all. Noah was not built to carry fishmen to the surface. Noah was built to carry surface dwellers down. Think about it. Think about the Void Century. Think about the flood rising, the continents drowning, millions of people trapped on shrinking landmasses as the ocean swallowed their homes. Where could they go? The mountaintops could only hold so many. The ships could only sail so long before the chaotic new ocean conditions destroyed them. The only safe place, the only place that would remain stable and habitable as the surface world drowned, was the one place that was already underwater. The one place where the rising sea level was not a death sentence, but simply a change in the ceiling. Fishman Island. Joy Boy did not promise to bring the fishmen up. Joy Boy promised to bring the humans down. He promised to use Noah, to use Poseidon, to use the Sea Kings, to evacuate the surface population to the underwater refuge of Fishman Island before the flood consumed them. He promised the Fishman royal family that their kingdom would become a sanctuary, that they would shelter the drowning world beneath the waves, that humans and fishmen would live together not because the fishmen ascended, but because the humans descended. The dream of coexistence was not a dream of the surface. It was a dream of the depths. It was a plan to save everyone by bringing them to the one place the 20 kings could not drown. And Joy Boy failed. The poneglyph apology that sits in the sea forest is not an apology for failing to elevate the fishmen, it's an apology for failing to save the humans. It is Joy Boy saying, I am sorry, I promised to bring them to you. I promised that Noah would carry the refugees of the surface world to safety, and I could not do it. The timing was wrong. The weapons were not ready. Poseidon was not born, or was killed, or was somehow unavailable when the critical moment came. The 20 kings moved faster than Joy Boy anticipated. The flood rose before the evacuation could begin. And so the surface world drowned, And the people who were supposed to board Noah died in the water instead of beneath it. And Joy Boy was left with a massive empty ark and a promise he could never fulfill. This is why Noah has been sitting there for 800 years. This is why the fishmen guard it with such reverence, even though they do not understand its true purpose. Noah is a monument to failure. It is the physical embodiment of a rescue mission that never happened. Every inch of that enormous ship represents someone who was supposed to be saved and was not. Every plank and timber and sail is a memorial to the drowned, to the millions who might have survived if Joy Boy had been faster, stronger, luckier. And this is why the promise matters so much. This is why Luffy's connection to Joy Boy is not just thematic, but functional. Because the promise was not just to the fishmen. The promise was to everyone. The promise was that one day someone would come who could finish what Joy Boy started. Someone who would gather the ancient weapons. Someone who would find the One Piece. Someone who would use the terraforming tools not to evacuate the survivors, but to restore the world itself, to drain the flood, to raise the continents, to make it so that Noah would never need to be used for its original purpose, because the surface world would exist again. Shirahoshi is Poseidon. Shirahoshi can command the Sea Kings. And Shirahoshi has already demonstrated that she can direct Noah, that the ship responds to her power, that the connection Joy Boy tried to establish 800 years ago still functions. This is not a coincidence. This is set up. Oda has spent years positioning the pieces for the moment when Noah finally fulfills its destiny. But that destiny is not evacuation anymore. The world has already drowned. The refugees are already dead. Noah's new purpose in the restored world that Luffy will create might be something else entirely. A symbol of the past. A reminder of what was lost. Or perhaps in the chaos of the final war, a literal ark after all, carrying the survivors of whatever cataclysm accompanies the destruction of the Red Line and the draining of the flood. Because make no mistake, the restoration will not be gentle. You do not reshape the geography of a planet without consequences. You do not drain an ocean without creating upheaval. When the flood recedes, when the continents rise, when the red line crumbles and the calm belts dissolve, there will be a period of absolute chaos. Tidal waves, earthquakes, weather patterns disrupted beyond recognition. The world will be remade, and remaking is violent. And in that violence, Noah might finally serve its purpose. Not carrying humans to Fishman Island, but carrying everyone, human and fishman alike, through the storm of rebirth to whatever world waits on the other side. Joy Boy failed 800 years ago. He left behind an apology and an ark and a promise that someone else would have to keep. That someone is coming. That someone is already here, wearing a straw hat and grinning like an idiot and declaring that he will be the king of the pirates. And when that someone finally reaches Laugh Tale, finally claims the One Piece, finally activates the terraforming suite that has been waiting for 8 centuries, Noah will move, the Sea Kings will pull, and the promise will be fulfilled. Not through evacuation, through restoration, through bringing the drowned world back to the surface, where it belonged all along. So what happens when Luffy pulls the plug? This is the question that has been haunting me since I started putting this theory together. This is the endgame that fictional pirate creator man has been building toward for over 1,000 chapters. Luffy will find the One Piece. Luffy will activate the terraforming suite. Luffy will do whatever Joy Boy could not do 800 years ago. And when that happens, when the mechanism finally engages, the world of One Piece will fundamentally cease to exist as we know it. The flood will drain. I do not know exactly how this will work. I am not a geologist, and even if I were, the physics of One Piece operate on rules that would make any real scientist weep into their coffee. But I can speculate, and speculation is what anime autopsy does best. We know that the Lulusia event pushed an island down and raised the sea level by displacing water upward. The reverse process, logically, would involve pulling something up and allowing water to flow downward. Where would the water go? Perhaps into the hollow spaces left by the original crushing. Perhaps into whatever void exists beneath the bottomless pit of Ani's lobby. Perhaps into some geological reservoir that has been waiting for 8 centuries to be refilled. The knock-up stream shoots water upward with enough force to launch ships into the sky. What if there is a corresponding mechanism that pulls water down with equal force? What if the terraforming suite includes not just the ability to manipulate currents and land masses and weather, but the ability to create geological drains, to open holes in the ocean floor that siphon the excess water back into the planet's interior? The flood rose. The flood can fall. And when it falls, when the sea level drops by dozens or hundreds of meters, every single island in the world will transform. The mountaintops will become mountains again. The isolated rocks in the middle of the ocean will connect to the landmasses they were always part of. The underwater ruins of the ancient kingdom will breach the surface for the first time in 800 years, emerging from beneath the waves like corpses rising from graves. The geography of One Piece will be unrecognizable. The Grand Line will lose its power as the magnetic anomalies dissipate. The calm belts will cease to exist as whatever seastone pollution created them is washed away or neutralized. The Red Line, that artificial monument to genocide, will crumble without the water pressure holding it together, or be deliberately destroyed by Pluton, or simply become irrelevant as the ocean it was built to stand above drains away beneath it. And when the Red Line falls, when that impossible wall finally comes down, the 4 blues will collide. This is the All Blue. This is Sanji's dream. Not a mythical location hidden somewhere in the world, but a result, a consequence. The All Blue does not exist yet because it cannot exist while the Red Line exists. The 4 seas are separated by that artificial continent, kept apart by 800 years of engineered geography. But when the barrier falls, when North Blue and South Blue and East Blue and West Blue finally crash together for the first time since the Void Century, every fish from every sea will swim in the same water. Every current will merge. Every isolated ecosystem will become one unified ocean surrounding one unified continent. The All Blue is not a place you find. The All Blue is a place you create. Sanji has been chasing a dream that is physically impossible under current world conditions, and Luffy is going to make it possible by reshaping those conditions. This is why the Straw Hat crew is not just a collection of powerful fighters. This is why each of them has a dream that seems almost absurdly ambitious. Zoro wants to be the world's greatest swordsman. Nami wants to map the entire world. Sanji wants to find the All Blue. Robin wants to discover the true history. Frankie wants to build and sail a ship that can go anywhere. Each of these dreams is either impossible or incomplete under the current world order, and each of them will become achievable when the restoration happens. Nami cannot map a world that is constantly drowning. Robin cannot fully understand a history that is still buried underwater. Frankie cannot sail everywhere when the calm belts and Red Line create impassable barriers. The dreams of the Straw Hat crew are not just character motivation. They are promises. They are things that will come true when Luffy does what Joy Boy could not. And then there is the name, the title of the very first chapter of One Piece, Romance Dawn. We always assumed this was metaphorical, the dawn of adventure, the beginning of Luffy's journey, the romantic notion of setting sail into the unknown. But what if it is literal? What if Romance Dawn is not just the title of the first chapter, but a description of the last? What if the final panel of One Piece shows the sun rising over a world that has never seen that particular sunrise before? A world without the Red Line blocking the horizon. A world where the unified continent emerges from beneath the receding waters. A world where the scattered survivors of 800 years of flooding finally see what their ancestors saw before the 20 kings drowned everything. The first dawn. The real dawn. The dawn that was stolen during the Void Century and will be returned when the One Piece fulfills its purpose. This is the ending. This is what fictional pirate creator man has been building toward from the very first page. Not a treasure, not a battle, not even a throne. A restoration, a healing. A world made whole again after 8 centuries of artificial brokenness. The One Piece is not wealth or power or even knowledge, although it probably includes all of those things. The One Piece is the mechanism that undoes the crime. It is the key that unlocks the drowned world. It is the answer to the question that has been hanging over this series since we first saw Luffy reach for the horizon. What is the One Piece? The One Piece is everything, literally. It is the one piece that was broken into many pieces, scattered across 4 artificial seas, buried beneath an artificial ocean, hidden behind an artificial continent. It is the world itself, fragmented and drowned and forgotten. And claiming it means putting those pieces back together, means draining the flood, means destroying the red line, means bringing the dead world back to life. Every island in One Piece is a gravestone. I said that at the beginning, and I meant it. Every rock that Luffy has visited is a memorial to what was lost. Every kingdom he has saved is a mountaintop cemetery, the last visible remnant of a civilization that drowned beneath the waves. But here is the thing about graves. Here is the thing about memorials. They are for the dead, yes. But they are also for the living. They are reminders. They are promises. They are ways of saying, we remember, and we will not let this happen again. Luffy is going to turn every gravestone into a foundation. He is going to drain the ocean and reveal the bones beneath. And then he is going to build on those bones. The drowned cities will rise. The buried history will surface. The graves will become gardens. And on the day that happens, on the morning when the sun rises over a unified world for the first time in 800 years, every single person who ever dreamed of freedom will understand what Goldie Roger meant. The One Piece is real. It has always been real. It has been beneath our feet the entire time, waiting for someone to pull it up from the depths, waiting for someone to laugh at the absurdity of a treasure that is also a planet, waiting for someone to look at a drowned world and say, not anymore. Romance Dawn is coming, and when it arrives, the gravestones will bloom. But you let me know what you think in the comments. And please do subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.